Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning. My name is Patricia Karam. I'm a senior advisor at the American Task Force for Lebanon, which is a US-based organization that's dedicated to strengthening the US-Lebanon ties. I will be moderating today's panel in commemoration of the Beirut blast, the massive 2020 explosion that leveled much of the capital city and killed more than 200 people, wounding thousands and displacing hundreds of thousands. This case caused global outrage with a massive paper trail and an insistent public demand on accountability. Yet, 3 years later, no progress has been reported, and productive tracks of investigation were derailed, often as a result of administrative interference. Our panel today will look at the Beirut port explosion in the broader context of Lebanon's economic and social collapse and political paralysis. What is the existing paper trail? With that, what is the potential for securing accountability and what can be done? Is political reform and change possible? For that, how do we get out of the current political stalemate? And finally, can the US help support the pursuit of accountability for the Beirut port explosion as part of a broader Lebanon response plan that is tied to presidential elections and a path out of the political impasse? Before I turn to our distinguished panelists today, I will give the floor to Ambassador Edward Gabriel, who is President and CEO of the American Task Force for Lebanon, among many other prestigious affiliations, and he will introduce our keynote speaker, Congressman Darren LaHood. Ed.
Yes, thank you, Patricia, for your introduction and moderating today's event, and thank you, Riyadh and Rhonda, for serving on this important panel today. Today's webinar is dedicated to the victims of the August 4th blast and to the Lebanese people who are suffering so much multiple crises as a result of the poor governance from Lebanon's political class. The international community with US leadership should now insist on the need for an independent investigation free of political interference into that port blast, and those obstructing the investigation should be held responsible. The failure to investigate the port blast, though, is reflective of a larger problem. Lebanon's political class is putting their own interests ahead of the Lebanese people. The country has now an 80-some% poverty rate, with nearly a third of those people being food insecure. Unemployment is rampant. Primary and secondary school is in trouble of total collapse. And the best and brightest of the Lebanese are leaving the country. As you know, the presidency has been vacant for 9 months. The government is in a caretaker status, and the IMF reform discussions have fallen by the wayside. Hopefully, though, this anniversary today, combined with US leadership that has been showing itself in the past few months, will signal a change for the better. Today should not be a time to only place blame on individuals. We've heard enough of that. Today, we must honor the victims of the August 4th blast by asking political parties of all political persuasions in Lebanon to come together and unite. They must find a common consensus on an agenda that responds to the needs of the Lebanese people. And hopefully it'll be in a country that will remain democratic, stable, prosperous, and sovereign. So now, before we begin the panel, we're honored to have with us a very special guest, Representative Darren LaHood, co-chair of the US-Lebanon Friendship Caucus and a member of the powerful Ways and Means and Intelligence Committees. Darren represents a large Lebanese American community from Peoria, Illinois, since 2015. I think they hail from one village in Lebanon. I'm sure he'll tell us. He's been a long-time friend of ATFL and an advocate of strong US-Lebanon relations. Congressman, thanks for being with us. The mic is yours.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Gabriel. And I want to thank the American Task Force for Lebanon for putting this on today, and Patricia, for you for hosting, and the valuable speakers we'll have today for this very important topic. Ed, I am very proud to be the co-chair of the U.S. Lebanese Friendship Caucus in the United States Congress. We continue to grow in terms of our membership and influence in the Congress. And as you mentioned, my district in Central Illinois, I represent 8,000 Lebanese families that hail from I-2 Lebanon, which is where my great-grandparents came from, and many relatives, and proud of my own Lebanese heritage. Ed, as you mentioned, Lebanon really is at a tipping point today. It's hard to believe that 3 years have passed since the tragic blast in the port of Beirut. However, within that time, the Lebanese people have become firmly entrenched in crisis and remain without answers or accountability from the government and their elected leaders. It's hard to forget the images we saw on that day 3 years ago and the tragedy that followed to the families who lost loved ones. Compounding this strategy is the ongoing humanitarian, economic, and political stalemate. With no finality to the investigation into the cause of the blast, and no accountability for those at fault, and no real focus on how Lebanon should and can move forward. With the help of the international community and the resiliency of the people of Lebanon, they were able to weather the worst of the blast impact and build toward a road to recovery. However, the stalemate by the political elite and the ongoing state of corruption have eroded confidence in the ability of the Lebanese government to both provide finality and justice for the blast or represent the best interest of the Lebanese people. After the 12th failed attempt to elect a president, the Lebanese parliament remains at a standstill, unable to implement much needed reforms that came into sharper focus after the August blast of 2020. Corruption, failure to enact economic reforms for further international aid, and the influence of non-state actors like Hezbollah on Lebanese elections have left a vacuum for accountability. The United States and Lebanon share a long history of engagement and support. However, this cannot be taken for granted. The government of Lebanon must be accountable to their people, and the ongoing political stalemate and economic collapse remains destabilizing. Additionally, the United States should consider moving forward with an additional focus on accountability and justice for all those involved in the events leading up to and including the port explosion. Yesterday, myself and Congressman Darrell Issa and Congressman Max Miller wrote a letter to the State Department requesting they strongly consider moving forward with targeted sanctions on those who have engaged in a pattern of obstruction of the constitutional processes for the presidential election. This includes people at the highest levels of the parliament. We must continue to put pressure on the government of Lebanon to live up to its commitments to the Lebanese people and the Lebanese Constitution. I and many others continue to believe that a strong, independent, and prosperous Lebanon is important for the interests of the United States, and our historic relationship is important to preserve and improve upon. We cannot let the victims and families of the blast and its cascading effects be forgotten. They all deserve justice. I am committed and remain focused on these issues surrounding Lebanon and the Lebanese people in the Congress, and will work to focus on justice and accountability for both now and into the future. Ed and Patricia and the whole team, I again want to thank you for having me this morning, and look forward to a fruitful discussion here this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman Lahoud. I will now introduce our speakers who will give their remarks for about 7 to 10 minutes. First, Riyad Kobaisi, who is a dogged investigative journalist and TV presenter who bravely exposes corruption at the highest levels of government in Lebanon. For several years before the Beirut 2020 Beirut port tragedy, he reported on corrupt customs officials, some of whom were later prosecuted, and has continued to really fight for justice through his accountability journalism in the aftermath of the deadly explosion. He and his team built a site documenting the story of the explosion, BeirutPortExplosion.com. For this and other reporting, he's the recipient of a 2020 Knight International Journalism Award presented by the International Center for Journalists to honor outstanding journalism that has had an impact. Kobaisi also normally anchors his own weekly show at Al Jadid called Down with the Rule of the Corrupt. I urge you all to tune in. Randa Slim is the director of the Conflict Resolution and Track 2 Dialogues program at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and a non-resident fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced and International Studies. A former vice president of the International Institute for Sustained Dialogue, Slim has been a senior program advisor at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, a guest scholar at the U.S. Institute of Peace, a program director at Resolve Inc., and a program officer at the Kettering Foundation. A longtime practitioner of Track 2 Dialogue and peace-building processes in the Middle East and Central Asia, she's also the author of several studies, book chapters, and articles on conflict management, post-conflict peace-building, and Middle East politics. First, Riyadh, I'll turn it over to you and ask you if you can give us some perspective on what has been done so far on the Beirut blast file, and what are really avenues for seeking and securing some actual accountability, especially for victims of the blast. Also, sensitizing the public to unison action of the political class, despite its proclaimed rivalries, and securing the massive documentary materials for future transitional justice action. Riyadh, I turn it over to you.
Okay, hi all. First, just to go directly to the bottom line, we can say that the investigation for now is still obstructed. And it is for a certain reason. It is obstructed for a certain reason, a very clear reason. That, like any mafia system, they want to prove to the audience, to the public, that they are unaccountable. For this very main reason. I mean, when we talk about the paperwork here, when it comes to this investigation, everything is clear. I mean, how the ship came to Lebanon, how did they manage to store ammonium nitrate in hangar number 12? Why the ammonium nitrate stayed there for like 6 or more years? Everything is clear in this matter. What was inside the hangar number 12 beside the ammonium nitrate? All these fireworks and Captagon factory, whatever was inside the hangar number 12. Everything is clear when it comes to these issues. The main question, I believe, and here I'm just assuming, what might the the judge investigating this issue was looking for, was whether this is only negligence and corruption and incompetence, or there are certain intentions behind it. I believe that's what he was just trying to search for, especially when it comes to the ministers, okay? Because when it comes to the employees, you can imagine this kind of incompetence, okay? You can imagine that because they are busy collecting money for their pockets and not collecting money for the treasury, they most probably, we can deal with it as an hypothesis that they were not taking in consideration or not dealing seriously with these issues because they are busy with other things, with collecting money to their pockets and the pockets of the mafia, by the way. And by the way, they are appointed there because of this. But when it comes to the ministers and the head of the security agencies, it will become very weird to just try to digest the idea or just imagine that they were not able to deal with this issue. It will be very hard to do so. But again, I cannot confirm on this issue. It can be both cases. It can be only negligence and incompetence and corruption, and it might be that there are certain intentions. Both hypotheses have kind of clues that support. I mean, for example, one of the things that might surprise you, that Savaro, the owner of the ammonium nitrate, at a certain point, they asked Hassan Raitem, the head of the port authority, to exempt them from paying what they call it, storage fees, okay, exempting them from paying the storage fees in order to be able to re-export these tons of ammonium nitrate. And he refused. Surprisingly, he refused, though they told him, this is you cannot sell it, these are explosives, just please let us get rid of it. And he simply eluded from answering them or from giving them the permission to take it out. So we have clues that gives you an impression that there are something weird behind storing ammonium nitrate there. A lot of things, especially when it comes to the way they, for example, when they took an order or from the urgent matter court in order to unload the cargo, they didn't tell him that these are explosives, which is very weird, okay? Though they were clearly informed that these are explosives. This is one of the things that is very creepy. But as I told you, in both ways, we have clues that can support it, whether it is something that was there for a certain intention or it's only corruption and incompetence. We have, and that's why I believe that the judge behind this investigation insisted on interrogating ministers based on the fact that they are accused, not only just witnesses, okay? Because there are certain things that should be clarified by them. But most importantly, what I do believe is important when it comes to this investigation and what happened in the 4th of August is that unfortunately, this thing can happen tomorrow again, because they didn't take any measures to make sure that the 4th of August will not happen again. I mean, incompetence is still there, corruption is still there, and negligence is still there, and people are appointed at Beirut port because they are qualified. But qualified with what? Qualified with collecting money for their pockets, for the mafia pockets, not for the treasury. And this is the main problem. I mean, whether it's the 4th of August is a conspiracy or someone was trying to store munitions there, or it is only negligence and corruption, in both cases, we are sure that negligence, corruption, and incompetence was used as a tool to store ammonium nitrate there. And unfortunately, no measures were taken to make sure this will not happen again. I mean, I do remember, I don't want to go into particularities and very specific examples, but I have to say it like that. I mean, one of those employees that were customs employees that were aware, was fully aware about the ammonium nitrate as explosives, according to one of the documents that I recently knew about it. After the explosion, he was giving instructions to his the people under his supervision and telling them, and I'm sorry I have to say it like that, just fuck everything at Beirut port. And if anyone told you anything, just tell them I told you to do so. This person, even after we published this recording, he was not imprisoned. Just to understand what do I mean by things can just happen again. I mean, we have also to take in consideration that at a certain point, that the former army leader, John Ahwaj, was fully aware that ammonium nitrate were stored at hangar number 12. This is, I mean, can you imagine that the head of the army, the former head of the army, was aware of the ammonium nitrate there and he didn't take an action? He acted like an agent, just giving suggestions for the custom. You can sell it to an Egyptian mess for it's explosive company that sells explosives, or you can re-export it. Bottom line, and no one after that from the army asked about this issue. This is the very scary things, that the 4th of August can happen again because there's no accountability and no measures taken to make sure that this thing will not happen again.
Thank you, Riyad. You paint a bit of a grim picture, and if I may say, the explosion and the circumstances around the investigation are emblematic of the bigger problems that are facing Lebanon today. So to Randa, maybe you can, maybe you can walk us through the difficult question of what change is necessary for any recovery to be possible. And perhaps you can provide us with a bigger context and any prospects for getting out of the stalemate and hence achieving some measure of justice and accountability.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to people in Beirut who are listening in. And thank you, ATFL, for organizing this panel and for hosting me as well. First, let me use this platform to send my thoughts and prayers to the families of the victims, as well as to the thousands who have been wounded by this blast and who are still suffering. You know, their pain is immeasurable and everlasting, and it is exacerbated by this impunity that we have been talking about, Riyadh has been talking about. No regime official has been held, is detained now currently. The investigation, the domestic investigation, has been derailed every step of the way, using laws to derail it. And so when we talk about impunity, as Riyadh said, building on what he said, this is a system, an institutionalized system of corruption and impunity that pervades every single aspect of Lebanon's political life. And it's a nexus of elites, political elites, financial elites, and judicial elites, aided by militia weapons that are coming together to protect a status quo that is corrupt, that is unaccountable, and that at every step of the way is denying citizens their right to life, as in the case of the blast. The right to life of a Lebanese citizen was denied by these corrupt elites in all these sectors, and their right to the truth and to justice since the delayment of the investigation. And so it's extremely hard to dislodge that system that has been in place since the end of the Civil War, very much aided by this power-sharing sectarian system, which basically, enables any kind of accountability, denies any kind of accountability on the basis of targeting a specific sectarian group or, religious group. And when I talk about political elite, I mean everybody. I mean, the slogan of the October 2019 revolution is exactly correct. All means all. Nobody is a good, Lebanon elites today in all sectors are basically all bad elite. The difference between them is in shades of bad, how bad they are. Some are worse than others, but I think all of them are equally bad. But let me say also with a caveat, there are judges that are trying to do their job, like Tariq Bitar, and he's being denied by his superior, like public prosecutor Ghassan Awaidat, from doing his job and is paying the price for it. There are other judges that are trying to get the banks prosecuted and that are being also stopped at every way by their superiors in the judicial branch, pushed on and egged on by the political elites, including the Speaker of the Parliament, and by the financial bosses, owners of banks, major shareholders of banks. So how we move from that is a Herculean task. People like Riyadh are doing their job in basically trying as much as possible, using facts, using evidence to shed the light on what has transpired, who's doing what, who is culpable of what. But at a certain time, they have hit a wall. They can take it as far. Families of the victims are doing their job. Civil society is doing their job. But at some point, they have hit the wall. And that's where the role of the international community. The role of the international community is in making the behavior of the elites in all sectors, judicial, political, financial, costly to them. Right now, they have really not paid any major cost to their obstructions of fiscal reforms, to their obstruction of the elections, to their obstruction of the Beirut blast. And what you need to do is basically change that incentive structure. Right now, they are not incentivized to do the right thing. They totally understand that any kind of fiscal reforms, any kind of investigation, as Riyadh said, into the port blast, any kind of restructuring of the banking sector is going to hurt their interest. And so if you look at the cost-benefit calculus of these elites, I mean, the cost is much, much, much higher than the benefit of any kind of change in their behavior. Sanctions can go far, as we have seen so far in the use of sanctions against Lebanese officials. They have limits to what they can do. And in Lebanon, there is this argument that they have not worked well. And I think it's a valid argument that sanctions have not worked well. But I think what we need to, doesn't mean that we should stop sanctions. I think more concerted sanctions by the United States, by the European Union, which has been very lax and very late in applying sanctions, against constantly threatening without really moving with action, talk, no action. I think that can also start getting their attention, more. There is now this move by the quintet, Qatar, Egypt, Lebanon, Qatar, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, US, and France, to link any future developments of Lebanon's hydrocarbon sector to reforms. Unfortunately, some members of that quintet, particularly the Arab members, in my opinion, are not going to be that interested in pushing this idea of accountability and pushing this idea of ending impunity for crimes like the port blast. I mean, like previous regional interventions in Lebanon, they were all focused on ending the crisis, or in the case of Ta'if, ending the war, and basically, putting in funds to help restart the economy, and nothing was done. So today's impunity about the port blast goes back all the way to the Ta'if Accord. It goes back all the way to this amnesty law, this blanket amnesty law that was issued after at the end of the civil war as part of the Ta'if agreement. And that has that was the starting point. If we did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1990, if warlords who are today leaders in Lebanon, were held accountable for their crimes in 1990, there is a very strong and valid argument that we would not be in today's crisis. We would not be in today's, miserable status quo in which Lebanon is mired. And so the question is, going forward, people in the international community, specifically countries, that are in the quintet, especially more than even France, the United States, and people in the United States, organizations like the American Task Force for Lebanon, congressional leaders, to push this concerted approach to Lebanon that includes not only a push for adoption of IMF reforms, but it's also important to push for adoption of a decent judicial reform bill. The one that is now facing the parliament does not meet any international standards for bills that promote judicial independence and judicial and accountability and justice for people who have been wronged. So it's not only about fiscal reforms. It is about independence, judicial independence. It is about restructuring the banking sector. It's about holding politicians and bankers accountable. And that's what it is. Now, is there an international will to do that? I hate to say it, there is none. People now are focused on a short-term, basically, approach. This short-termism is something that has been basically a basic feature of international interventions when it comes to Lebanon and Lebanese crisis. Let's finish the crisis. Let's end it. Today, it's about the presidential election. Let's get a president elected. Yes, it's important, but unless it's part of a holistic, concerted approach that tackles all these other aspects that have sustained, enabled, and will continue to enable this regime of corruption and impunity, Lebanon will keep moving from crisis to crisis to crisis. I will end here.
Thank you, Randa. And, I want to, before I open it up, I want to just urge the audience to, if they want, submit at this point any questions they have to the panelists. But I will use my, my status as moderator just to ask a couple of questions first as a follow-up. And I really sort of, Randa, you talk about, the lack of truth and accountability, truth and reconciliation type efforts, which may have held the Lebanese back. I want to suggest, if we consider that the Beirut port explosion is really a symbol of the prevailing culture of impunity that you discussed. We have the inaction following the indictment of Hariri's killer by the special tribunal. You have the case of Riyad Salami right now, and you have, the various assassinations that took place, including that of Luqman Slim. The question and sort of the general kind of inaction and impunity in this regard. I'll ask it to you, but I'll invite Riyad to answer the question as well. Are there avenues for, non-official efforts and initiatives to sort of mobilize people around truth-seeking and if not pressure the government, because you seem to suggest that they're impervious to pressure, to prevent maybe further amnesia for wrongdoing? So I'd be interested in both of your responses on that.
You want me to start?
Go ahead. Yeah.
If you look at other experiences of countries that have ended their war or that ended their political crisis and then moved on to establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as part of moving the country into a post-conflict peace building and with accountability for the crimes committed during the war as an important part of peace building. And it has now, whether we look at Latin American cases or whether we look at South Africa cases or whether we look at some cases in the Arab region like Morocco or whether we look at some cases in Eastern Europe, I think what you find is that the main driver for this movement was the civil society, aided at the time by the fighters, some, especially in the case of Colombia. You had a lot of the FARC fighters who basically were supporting a lot of the civil society people who were calling for truth and reconciliation to move ahead with that. In our case, of course, we had some repentant fighters, from the Civil War, but none of them, I think, went as far as calling for truth and reconciliation. Today, for example, there is this letter that has been circulated by a number of human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, signed on by more than 300 individuals, including families of the victims, family of the firefighters, calling on the United Nations Human Rights Council to establish an impartial fact-finding commission. Maybe it should be, there are a lot of non-Lebanese citizens, who have been killed in this blast, or Lebanese citizens who hold dual citizenship. Citizens of those countries also deserve justice. So I think there is now this push by local civil society effort, by civil society organization, basically having given up on the domestic investigation, to call on the international community to step in through the UN Human Rights Council to establish an impartial fact-finding commission to basically get to the bottom of this. Because with this political elite, as you put it yourself, I don't see, and judicial, to be very honest, and some of the judicial elites, I don't see the domestic investigation is going to be unblocked anytime soon. I think the same tactics of derailing it is going to be used, using, by the way, legal tactical measures. I mean, there are it's their interpretation of the law or misinterpretation of the law to handle, or to protect them from accountability for their crimes, whether it's in the financial sector or in this case, in the port blast. It's just amazing, it's just amazing. And so I think an intervention of this sort can be helpful. Look, I'm always reminded whenever I feel down about Lebanon, I'm reminded by Martin Luther King's Jr.'s famous saying, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends our justice. I mean, it's going to take time because, again, if we look at all post-conflict settings in other parts of the world, these things did not happen easily. It required a dogged effort by big elements of the civil society who basically had, streamlined these ideas within the public. And I think that's where the next effort is, that there is sympathy for the families of the victim. There is sympathy for the wounded, but I don't see it is enough to push that kind of public-wide effort to put pressure on the Lebanese politician, but also to get the international community to. So in addition to writing letters, I think the onus is on civil society organization to really keep, to mainstream this idea and get as much public support as possible for this.
Thank you, Randa. Riyad, do you want to interject?
One of the main questions that I always get when it comes to doing stories, investigative stories, and exposing corruption from the audience and public is that, and what next? I mean, how gonna we benefit from that? Especially that, unfortunately, we don't see the proper reaction from the judiciary system when it comes to exposing corruption here in Lebanon, and that's leave kind of frustration for people. I mean, okay, you exposed corruption, it's very clear, the evidences are very clear, but nothing is happening. Well, this might be true, but what I do believe is that our role as an investigative journalist is to inculcate the culture of accountability. I want people to understand that these politicians call themselves Zoama or whatever in Lebanon, leaders, these people are not gods, okay? And they're accountable. And you should understand that these people, they can just have the feeling of fear like us. They sweat because of fear. And when the moment we confront them with evidences, they will feel uncomfortable. And they should see that. And that's what I love with my, with what I do, is just to prove to the public that these people are not untouchable. These people are touchable. I can account them. I can either challenge them on TV and at a certain point address them in improper language at a certain point, just to prove this point, just to prove that these people are not gods. And for me, if I manage to inculcate this culture, this will be very great. At a certain point, I remember when I started exposing the Swiss leaks in 2016, I remember I went on air and I told them, Nabih Berri is an employee for me. And the second day I was with the mechanic, he was fixing my car and he told me, are you aware what you said? I told him, yes. He told me, you said Nabih Berri is an employee for you? I told him, yes. And he was like, okay, just you said it. don't put it on my word. I mean, because they are afraid of this notion. They don't understand that the politicians are employees. They work for us. And that's the main thing that we should work for, just to inculcate this culture. These people are not there because they are superheroes. These people are there to serve us. And they are supposedly paid by the taxes we pay.
Thank you, Riyad. Before I turn, there are a couple of interesting questions from the audience. I want to ask you, I know you discussed that you've been doing a lot of work deconstructing the political discourse around the Beirut port blast. Can you tell us a little bit about, that and that work that you've been doing and what these different narratives have been?
Yes, it's a website we've been working for since 2 years. It's called www.beirutportexplosion.com. The vast majority of the docs, you can find it in English, translated in English by the Human Rights Watch, or some others, the summary of the docs. Unfortunately, the new docs, we didn't manage to translate it yet. The new thing that we did for now, we have a list for all the defendants. We have deconstructing the political discourse when it comes to the investigation. And unfortunately, it's still in Arabic, but it's very interesting because you can see the huge number of contradictions and dichotomies among this discourse. And there are certain statements which are very significant. For example, at a certain moment, Gibran Bassil will tell his allies bluntly that I'm not going to support you with this immunity thing when it comes to the parliament, because when I asked you to put your hand at the file at the beginning, you refused. He said that bluntly, by the way. These statements just went with the flow. No one noticed it. But if you just, we've revised a lot of speeches for all these political leaders, and we find a lot of contradictions. For example, the leader of Hezbollah, at a certain point, he was blaming the judge why he's not investigating the ammonium nitrate thing, and who brought the ammonium nitrate thing. And when I do remember that when my colleague Firas Hatoub started to do his investigation, he was like, okay, now they created this issue, who brought the ammonium nitrate thing? And after that, we discovered that on the 7th of August 2020, he had a statement where he said that we all knew who brought the ammonium nitrate. Which, you can find very, very creepy things. The very astonishing thing is that, they are supposed to be dealing with something which is very sensitive. You are talking about an explosion that almost destroyed the capital, okay? And the least you can do is just to be accurate when you are using your terms when it comes to this investigation. It's very funny that the vast majority of these politicians, for example, were asking the judge to expose the secrecy of the investigation. This is bluntly, clearly, the first a student who's studying law, the first freshman student who will understand that you cannot expose the secrecy of the investigation. Yet the vast majority of the politicians, they were blaming the judge because he was not exposing the secrecy of the investigation. And they just said that it's because for the insurance companies, and they want the families to take money from the insurance companies. That's why they want them to expose. He wants the judge to expose the secrecy of the investigation. Those who understand Arabic, I believe they will enjoy reading this segment. It's about the 7 parties: Lebanese Forces, it's a Socialist Party, Free Patriotic Movement, the Future Movement, Hezbollah, Amal. I don't know if there are 7 parties. Deconstructing with evidences, we've took the videos. It's not only the quotation written. It's only we also broadcasted or published the video itself.
Thanks, Riyad. Randa, you talked a little bit. There are a few questions in the audience about the role of the judiciary. You talked about the importance of not focusing just on IMF reforms, but also looking at a decent judicial reform bill, and at the same time, so the questions that come up have to do with, and at the same time, you talked about the U.S. intervention or the international approach, which has very much focused on sanctions and has not always been effective, right, in pushing for change. Here, the question is, with the backdrop that you did point out that there's a lack of international will and all that, is there something that can be done? Can the US and the international community, perhaps building on the sympathy that comes with the Beirut blast and the victims of the blast, that can do to push for more judicial accountability? And what are other things that the international community can do?
I mean, look, sanctions have not been effective, but they remain a tool. A tool by themselves for policy is not enough. You know, it is a policy tool to basically push toward behavioral change of a certain person, a certain official. Now, if it is part of a multi-track, sustained effort, sanctions can really have an important role to play. The problem is that, especially in the case of the United States, we have really focused on a couple of tracks until now. I mean, the administration. I have to say, there is a difference between the US Congress on Lebanon and between the US administration, this one on Lebanon. The US Congress has been pretty consistent in keeping the Lebanon file alive, in pushing for tougher measures against corruption, corrupt elites across the board, in coming up with, you know, in starting to identify names, you know, because until now, even Europeans, they will say, oh, officials. But I think some letters are becoming even more, how to say, assertive in saying, you, Mr. You know, X, in the last letter, the Speaker of the Parliament is to be sanctioned, because until now he has felt himself is beyond getting sanctioned. And I think, I mean, the US, for example, has not sanctioned the Lebanese central bank governor. He left now, but that was a big mistake of, in my opinion, the US administration, leaving the investigation to be done by the European central banks on cases of corruption. So sanctions as part of a sustained long-term approach to getting to Lebanon, involving, again, the economic measure, involving the reform measures, the restructuring of the banks, involving the judicial sector, is the only way to go. For example, for me, one of the biggest culprits in the judicial sector, based on his behavior in terms of derailing the domestic investigation, is public prosecutor Ghassan Awaidat. He has not yet been touched by any sanction. Now, some people can explain why, because maybe it has to do with some American citizens that needed to be freed. But I mean, this is a person that should be right there on the top of a potential sanctions list for his corruption and his involvement in derailing any kind of investigation of corrupt cases, including in derailing the port blast case. So, we need to be more holistic and look at the issue, you know, from, again, different aspects. And at the heart, in my opinion, without judicial reform bill, and as I said, the bill that is today on the independence of the judiciary on the parliament docket does not meet any international standard, not even the minimum of any international standard of a bill that can guarantee independent judiciary. I mean, again, we are not talking about this. We are not talking about this. I mean, I don't see it coming up often in statement by administration officials or even by embassy officials, US embassy officials in Lebanon. Yet at the heart of really rooting out this institutionalized system of corruption is an independent judiciary. Without an independent judiciary going forward, none of these crimes are going to be exposed, and none of these potential future crimes will be prevented. As Riyadh said, the port blast can happen again. I mean, something like the port blast can happen again, partly because there are no costs that have been incurred by the perpetrators, as well as by those officials who are linked to the, you know, have been charged with crimes related to this, and partly because the international community, to be very honest, has lost focus on this.
Can I add something, Patricia? I do believe that, I mean, if international community is interested in fighting corruption in Lebanon, for example, we know that the United States supports the army. I mean, supporting the institutions responsible for accountability is very important. Unfortunately, these are the very cornerstone for any state. I mean, Fuad Shahab is the former president who's known for doing So the foundations of the state, like تفتيش المركزي, the central inspection, ديوان المحاسبة, it's something that is related for auditing, state auditing thing. I mean, these are the institutions. If you manage to support, you can help in fighting corruption. Without supporting these institutions, you cannot imagine or manifest the idea of fighting corruption. At the end of the day, corruption is still there. If you don't have any institutions to counter this corruption, then corruption might be used for security reasons in order to do whatever you want. And this is what's happening actually in Lebanon. They are using corruption, incompetence, and negligence in order to do whatever they want, whether on the fiscal approach or the security approach.
Can I add something, Patricia?
Yes, please.
I think really the recent approach by the quintet, regarding Lebanon and the potential threat of or conditionality of linking their investment and their role in pushing forward the Lebanese hydrocarbon sector after the oncoming period of exploration. After the exploration, there needs to be investments to keep this forward, and that's where the Qataris, the French, and the Italians, part of the consortium that is now exploring gas in Block 9, is going to have a play role. So the recent statement by by a senior Qatari official about a conditionality being contemplated between, some actions by the political elites on the reform measures and their investment in further in the hydrocarbon sector. I think that is the first time that I feel some conditionality will get their attention, because it affects their interest. They are very personally invested, economically invested in the future of the hydrocarbon sector. And so that is a conditionality that, in my opinion, might work if really, pushed forward, and if the quintet were to, but by itself is not going to be enough. And as I said earlier, it's going to fall on the Americans and on the French to push this idea of accountability. The other three members of the quintet are not very much, again, not known, but also not interested in investing too much in pushing for accountability, as long as the crisis is resolved and Lebanon moves forward. But I think it's going to fall on the Americans and the French, and particularly the Americans, to really, invest heavily in the idea of judicial reforms and accountability and justice for the poor class victim, which we haven't seen yet, by the way, from the American administration.
There's a question. I'll follow up with the questions from the audience about the imperviousness of the political class to change. And of course, you both mentioned this. Riyad talked about a need to change the culture and the importance of shaming. You also talked about the importance of civil society activism. But you also brought up this idea that the political class is rotten. And in that case, how do you replace a whole political class? What could change that is basically the question from the audience. Difficult question.
No, I believe it should be a constructual change. I don't believe that in Lebanon the radical change works. I mean, especially during the 17th of October uprising, people were talking about revolution. The very sensitive thing when it comes to Lebanon that you cannot, usually revolution is correlated with civil wars, according to history. And civil war in Lebanon, unfortunately, because of the confessional nature of Lebanon, it means just as if you are pressing the restart button, and people, or the accumulation you did when it comes to the awareness as a citizens, you will be restarting everything, and people will go to the, every citizen will go to his confessional group in order to protect himself. So that's why I believe that radical changes in Lebanon cannot happen. We can rely only on constructual changes, and to as I said, this will take a lot. This will take a lot of time. I do remember in the 17th of October uprising, I was like talking to a few people, and then I told them, you should know that what we are doing now is not. We are not doing this thing for our future, neither for the future of our sons. We are doing that for the future of the sons of our sons. I mean, can you imagine how far this will be? Because this is Lebanon. I mean, Michel Sheikha, one of those responsible for the foundation of Lebanon and especially its constitution, he said that Lebanon is a country that cannot be fixed. He has this very, very famous statement. So it's not easy in Lebanon to expect something easy when it comes to reform. These things should happen on a long period, and it should not happen radically because of the nature of Lebanon and because of other things. We know that in Lebanon, not only now, by the way, even before, we have this very complex situations when it comes to having another armies beside the Lebanese army, things which make it very hard to make radical changes in Lebanon.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
It's a very important question, and it's something that, you know, I hear it in many fora discussing Lebanon, and it's really a dilemma, you know, for the international community, is that when neither sticks nor carrots have worked with them, so neither sanctions have been able to change them, nor all these incentives of putting billions of dollars to help Lebanon recover from its economic crisis has been able to change them. And partly because they know reforms are going to impact their interests. I mean, that system of patronage that has been in place, you know, forever now, and these people are invested in it, and their power is invested in it and is aided and nurtured by it. They are not going to give it up. I mean, they are not going to give it up. It's just nobody will rule itself out of power, to be very honest. It's the people that have to rule them out of power. And so I totally agree with Riyadh. I think it's a transitional, long-term, dogged process involving media, journalists like Riyadh who do outstanding jobs with their investigation, facts-based investigation, civil society, human rights organization, but at the same time, the international community and the regional countries. The problem is that there are too many crises today, and Lebanon, at least in the US, is, especially with this administration, is really not even on a priority list right now. I mean, they pay attention to it every now and then. Maritime border, yes, that's important. We worked on it for a while, and then we got out. I mean, short of violence in the streets or violence on the Lebanese-Israeli border, I don't see the priority. I mean, Lebanon getting any higher on the ladder of on the priority ladder of this administration. And without, I mean, the quintet is a good approach. It's really a good approach because that's how this crisis is going to be solved. The problem is that I'm afraid the quintet will be, again, governed by this short-termism approach and focused on very specific issues, presidential election, IMF deal, and basically not approach this holistically. And that's where the Lebanese themselves, people in Lebanon, as well as expats who care about getting Lebanon out of this persistent cycle of conflict cycle. I mean, Lebanon has been, since I'm born, Lebanon has been moving from crisis to crisis to crisis to crisis. It's like a cancer that is somehow kept under check, but it's not cured. And so we need to really come to a place where we can create enough capacity, potential in the country to basically move out this permanent crisis cycle. Now, in the short term, you are not going to get rid of the political class. I totally agree with Riyadh. All means all is very good, it's very important, and it's very important to say that all of them are involved in this. Nobody is a good, there are no angels among these elites. But at the same time, we cannot root them out right now. Nobody can, I mean, there are elections, they happen in Lebanon. You elect every now and then independent candidates. I mean, civil society keeps pushing for issues. Again, this kind of change it takes a long time. It's very difficult. There is this rule in conflict resolution that it takes you as many years to solve a conflict as the years that brought you into the conflict. And if we even start only in 1990, we are talking about, or in 19, if this current cycle, 1990, the end of Ta'if, that's we are talking about 32 years. It's going to take us at least as many to get out of this cycle.
Thank you, Randa. You mentioned elections, and there's a question from the audience about whether there's something that can be done to really enlighten the Lebanese voters to stop re-electing the old guard.
It's not about enlightening. I don't think that people here in Lebanon are not aware that they are ruled by mafias. I mean, they are aware of that. But I always draw this comparison. I mean, if you are, let's assume you are on a ship, and you know that this ship is sinking. I mean, you will not just jump to the sea. You need to jump to a rescue boat, okay? And this is what people are not founding for now. It's very complicated. But I prefer to use this famous quote. I mean, not famous, this lovely quote for me. I mean, like, Lebanon is ruled by a mafia elected via democratic process. So I'm not saying that these people, the mafias, they don't have a popular legitimacy. They do have, but for various reasons. First of all, they have money, and money means power. And that's why sanctions is important, by the way. They say that sanctions is not important. Sanction is important, by the way, and not necessarily directly on the politician. Sometimes it will be more painful when you will put it on their proxies. But this is a different issue. I mean, at a certain point, I will say that sanctions might play a role in helping in decreasing their power, okay? But this is not only enough. The main thing that we face here in Lebanon, that the elite, the change elite, between two brackets, are not till now demonstrating themselves or providing themselves as a valid alternative for people. People, when they want to jump from the ship, they need to know that they are jumping to a rescue boat. They cannot just jump for the sake of jumping. They know that they are ruled by mafias and thieves, but people are not stupid to jump to the sea like that. That's why I don't like this. Here in Lebanon, some people draw these comparisons that people are sheep because they are like sheep because they are electing these political class. No, it's not like that. People are electing those who can provide them with certain portion of the system. Okay, they know that they are getting the very small portion, but at least that's what they can get. In order to encourage people to change, you have to provide them with a real alternative. Unfortunately, for now, the candidates who managed to succeed in the election, some of them are not providing a good image, by the way. I have to be frank with that. I mean, I was not expecting them to be a one block. I don't like that because they are not one block, by the way. But their performance, some of them, their performance is not encouraging, by the way. So that's the main issue I do believe with, is like offering people a real alternative. And this, for me, cannot be established without political parties. Okay, civil society is very important, but we need political parties, political approach, a clear political approach for different parties. We might have left, right, whatever. I don't care, but we should have a political approach. things which we lack for now.
I totally agree with Riyadh on this. It is, I think the change, what's called the change parliamentarians have been really, for the most part, a disappointment to Lebanese. They have not been able to really mount an effective, as Riyadh put it. And I heard exactly the same metaphor that he used, from relatives of mine. They said, we know the ship we are on. It's a very bad, it's not a secure ship. It's a bad ship. It can sink anytime, and it's sinking now. But again, as he put it exactly, where do you want me to jump off the ship to? And these are people who basically voted for change candidates, and they are super disappointed. So I hear exactly that same message every time I'm in Lebanon. And again, but it doesn't mean that elections are not, again, a policy tool by which you can promote. It's definitely a tool along with many others, but it's the only way, in my opinion, in Lebanon, over time, promote change in the elite system. It's the only way. Absent that, you have war, but also we tried war, civil war, and we ended up with the same warlords now in governments. The people who fought the war are the same one who are in government. So I'm not sure that a future war will do major difference in the makeup of the political system. And so I think election is one way, sustained pressure by the international community, pushing for reforms by the international community, conditionality by the international community. The pressure from below is extremely important. Civil society, media. I think, again, it's the arc is super long, but eventually it's the only way to do it without violence. And it's the only way to sustain it in the long term once it is done without violence.
Thank you, Randa. I'm conscious of the time, and there are a few questions. I want to leave some time for you to provide some closing remarks, like short. But there are a couple of questions to Riyadh that I'm going to lump together because they're related. One question has to do with, is there any hope for Judge Bitar to resume his investigation anytime soon? And the other one is, how far could one go into the investigation? Do you think that the media outlets are part of the corrupt system? And can you talk a little bit about how your bosses deal with you in these cases? Not too long.
The Lebanon are part of the system, but just to say they are part of the corruption system or not, that depends on every case. I'm not gonna say that they are definitely out of the corruption system or inside the corruption system. I do know that there are certain cases where you can argue that they are part of the corruption system. It depends. In this case, I prefer to deal with every media personnel as a separate case, okay? Because in every institution and every media outlet, you can see corrupted media personnels and those who are trying to fight corruption. This is Lebanon, by the way. We don't have media that is funded by the taxpayers, like in London, for example. Here in Lebanon, media outlets are, to a certain point, are owned by confessional institutions or businessmen. So this is Lebanon. Nothing special to say about that. When it comes to the investigation, I prefer to answer. I've read someone who's a question about someone who's asking if any of those running for the presidential election mentioned anything about the port investigation. And actually, no. Unfortunately, no. No one of those are running for the presidential election or their names is mentioned for being that they are candidates for being president. No one is mentioning anything about this investigation. And that's why I told you, this is the very scary thing about the 1st of August, that it can happen again, if not in the port, at the Beirut airport. I don't know where, but the mentality is still there. And there's kind of a state of denial. They are refusing to accept the fact that corruption caused this explosion. And that's why from time to time they go with the media with certain conspiracy theories that lacks any kind of evidences. Though when it comes to corruption and negligence and incompetence, you can substantiate your argument with tons of evidences. But here in Lebanon, there is a state of denial among a lot of media persons who don't want to believe that these three main elements were at least behind storing ammonium nitrate in hangar number 12. Well, do I believe that Judge Bitar will reach a conclusion? I don't like wishful thinking. I don't believe that they will let him to do so. I don't like wishful thinking. But most importantly, I believe that he is embarrassing them with what he is doing. That's the important thing. The more he is insisting on going with this file, he is embarrassing them. I mean, they are embarrassed now. It's very clear now who is obstructing the investigation. And if we just manage to prove that, that will be very great. Because again, I told you, for the investigation for now, we know almost everything. We know how the ship came, how the ammonium nitrate was stored in hangar number 12, who knew about it. We still have a question about who ignited the fire, whether it was like a spontaneous thing because of the workshop they were doing there in order to fix the door, or someone on purpose did that. Okay, this is the question that is still there. But other things, we just want, if the investigation wants to go deeply, it was whether this incompetence is intended or not. Is there a law in Lebanon? We know it, like someone told them, don't touch this hangar or not. This cannot be disclosed without interrogating the ministers, and something which they are refusing to do. They are refusing to do as a defendants. They are accepting to do it as a witnesses, as if they are just people that they were passing by the port when these things happen. By the way, most importantly, we have to say the very ugly fact is that when the fire started until hangar number 12 exploded, it took a lot of time, almost 1 hour or something like that. The president knew about it. The head of the government knew about it. A lot of the security agencies knew about it. No one told the Lebanese people just to go out of their balconies, for example, or to cut the road. They have the ability to cut the roads in order to pass when they want to go from one place to another. But to prevent or to warn the people, though they knew what is inside hangar number 12, when it was on fire, they didn't warn the people. That's the very ugly fact. And till now, they don't feel, or they don't think that they should be blamed for that. Our president said that when they told him about that, that was too late. No, it was not too late to inform us and to inform the people that there is explosives in hangar number 12 that is on fire for now. It was not too late to do so, and he didn't.
Riyad, thank you. We have a minute left, but I want to just, while I close out the webinar, I want to just refer to one of the comments from the audience that accountability is the key for any change. But if political leaders keep using the element of fear in people, that I am your sole protector against the other, then change is difficult. This echoes a little bit what you both said, that we have to invest in bottom-up civic education and really empower people to reflect on their fears and find common ground with each other. With that, I want to ask you if you can give us, amidst the sense of both despair that we're feeling and outrage at the same time, at the lack of accountability, some closing thoughts about how we go forward from this.
I think this request by families of the victims, by the families of the firefighters, by hundreds of Lebanese and non-Lebanese who have signed off on this letter, being circulated, I think yesterday and today, to establish a independent fact-finding mission to get to the bottom of what happened is extremely important. I think it's very clear, and that will put pressure. If it doesn't lead to much, it's at least going to put pressure on the political elite, judicial elites to move forward with the domestic investigation. But absent that, I'm worried that they're going to use the same tactics to delay the investigation. Embarrassment is important, but we need to move into action 3 years now after the blast. The people deserve justice. The victims deserve justice. And I think the international community need to start prioritizing this going forward.
Riyadh?
One word, Patricia. Persistence. Persistence. We have to be persistent. That's all what we can do. Just to keep doing what we are doing. We have to understand that they are relying on the fact that at a certain point, we're gonna get bored or we will lose hope. That's why persistence is very important.
Thank you, Riyadh. Thank you, Randa. Thank you all for tuning in on behalf of ATFL. I believe this webinar has been recorded live and will be available for streaming if you want to log back on. Thank you all and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.